So we see a strike on the Ahli hospital in Gaza. It's a small hospital which at the time, according to information, it had about 5,000 civilians present at the time of the strike, and the claim is that there's more than 500 fatalities from that strike. We have this video here to show exactly what happened, and we see here there was a major strike. The initial explosion was big, and then there's the fire from the cars which were in the parking lot. Then we see the emergency workers working in the area, and they were carrying out different stuff and so on. This is the video from the New York Times. So based on this, we see that there was a major strike. The initial explosion was big, but what followed was a fire between the cars. So this is clear evidence that this was the actual strike, as we will see later on. We then move on to what came after. As soon as this happened, essentially the whole world started accusing Israel, because that is the logical step. When a Gaza hospital is struck, we would assume it is Israel, because it is the Israelis launching massive airstrikes 24/7 in Gaza. At some point they claimed that they launched over 100 airstrikes within a single hour. So with that many airstrikes happening in Gaza, it is normal to assume at some points they will hit a hospital or something of that caliber. So this is what happens. The world started accusing Israel. Now Israel was in a situation where they are being accused of causing this catastrophe, which essentially leads to major international implications against their cause, their support, and so on. So what is their self-defense? The first one is as seen in these two videos. Let's look at the first one first. We see that there was a rocket which the Palestinians had launched, which was flying in the air, then suddenly it switched directions, and then it blows up mid-air. So their explanation is that what happened was that this missile blew up mid-air due to a failure, and then the shrapnel fell down and caused this explosion. In the second video, we see another missile strike. It is claimed that this is the same. The reason why we see only one missile on the first one and multiple missiles on the second one is due to, at some point when the missile is launching, it stops with the burner because the trajectory and everything is already on. So one of the missiles had its engine continue combusting, and then at some point it changed directions and so on. While all the others already had their fires off, and as such they stopped. They were already flying under momentum. So this is the Israeli claim. It is a failed rocket by the Palestinians that ended up hitting their own hospital. So the shrapnel from a single missile is what caused this major explosion and all of these fatalities. The second part is this video here, which shows satellite imagery and drone footage of the explosion and what happened after as their self-defense. So essentially the argument here is that the explosion was small, there was a fire, this can be caused by shrapnel, and there's no crater. If there's no crater, it's not them, because their bombs cause craters in the ground, as we see here, diameter of 7 meters, diameter of 19 meters, based on the bombs that they've used. Then what is the Palestinian counter-argument? Because at this point, they have made a pretty good case. Israelis say that it is a failed Palestinian rocket that did it, so it is the Palestinians' fault, and they remove their own fault by showing that there's no crater. If there's no crater, it's not them, because they use heavy weapons. So what is the Palestinian counter-argument to this? The first one is that they claim and talk about the sound you will hear here. That was the sound of a missile, of the Palestinian missile. This is a US practice of a bombing using the JDAM system. The JDAM system is for targeting, meaning it is accuracy. And if you listen to this, you can see the sound is very similar between the US practice and the explosion, but not when it comes to the missile. The missile makes a much smaller sound than in the US practice and in this explosion that happened by the hospital. So essentially, based on the sound, the Palestinians are claiming that this is a Israeli bomb because they use the same as the United States. Not because both use the JDAM, because that's a targeting system. It has nothing to do with the sound of the explosion. But it means that it is a bomb dropped by the Israeli Air Force due to the sound. So they claim that the sound means that it is an Israeli bomb. As for how there's no crater, they claim if it is an explosion between 300 and 600 pounds, then that doesn't necessarily have to be a crater, and the surrounding buildings doesn't need to be as damaged as the Israelis claim they need to be. So essentially the bomb is small enough to have caused such a small explosion in comparison. Essentially what they're saying is that the Israelis didn't want to blow up the whole hospital, they just want to scare people off, because they are wanting them to evacuate from the northern parts of Gaza where this hospital is located. The Israelis have warned the Palestinians to leave this hospital twice, and they still haven't, and therefore they launched a bomb that is small to scare them off. And then they used that small bomb to claim it was a Palestinian rocket that failed. So that is the Palestinian first argument. Then we have the second argument, which is a different perspective. We see this video here, which is from the same missile strike at the same time, at the same point, but from a different perspective. And from this we see that the rockets are flying to the eastern parts, to the right side, and the explosion is happening in the center. So the missiles are not firing from or in the direction of the explosions, but in the opposite direction, essentially. And this is all due to a different perspective. From the first one, it looked like they were flying in the same direction. But from this perspective, it looks like they're flying in a completely different direction. So they're saying, well, from this perspective, it is clear that it's not a Palestinian rocket. And based on this perspective, it does seem that the Palestinian rockets flew in a different direction from the hospital and thus from these explosions. And if it flew from a different direction, there's no way it could simply just go from this direction and then suddenly go around and fly over here, because it would need the engine, the afterburner, to show the missile, because this missile would be shown the whole distance, because if the engine stops working, then there's no way the rocket could change directions. So essentially, it is not a Palestinian rocket from this perspective. And that is the Palestinian second argument. They have a third one as well. And that is that the explosion was too big to be a Palestinian rocket. Because we see here in this video what a Palestinian rocket strike looks like. Notice how the sound is similar, and here how can an explosion, a direct rocket strike, essentially cause nothing, but somehow shrapnel from a Palestinian rocket can blow up the whole hospital. That is their third argument. We then move on to the next part, which is the geolocation of these strikes. So we all know that this is actually the hospital strike and not some other strike. The explosion from the video matches with the double explosion, the first one and then the second one. And we see from all those videos that this matches. And based on one of the videos, we do the geolocation from different sources. I'll link them in the comments. But yeah, essentially we see based on this that this was the actual hospital hit.
The Middle East Monitor spoke to Dylan Griffith, a weapons expert and US Army veteran of the Afghanistan war, who gave us his take on the key claims made by Israel. Claim 1. Israel was not responsible for the attack.
For anyone that has any amount of experience being around explosives, and certainly a lot of Army combat veterans are going to have a similar experience who were in the Middle East, especially in Iraq and Afghanistan, and maybe had called in airstrikes on compounds or facilities. One of the most common munitions in use there is going to be a JDAM. A JDAM is a guided or unguided aircraft-fired munition.
This video circulating on social media has now been verified by the Washington Post as the strike that hit the hospital.
Anyone who has that experience would immediately recognize some key characteristics that make what occurred there in that video seem like a JDAM. There's a pretty typical sound signature of something that is moving from a vertically dropped or fired position. Someone had posted a video contrasting the two of a compound in Afghanistan being struck by a 1,000-pound JDAM, I think, and then this video. The sound characteristic of the video, it seems to me that it would be indicative of a guided munition, because you get that whistling of the fins correcting on the way down to the hospital. But, you know, anything with a tail kit on the back of it, with fins on the back of it, could make a similar sound. So it's tough to know, but it did seem to hit exactly where it was intended to hit.
Claim 2. The rocket came from Hamas or Islamic Jihad.
Hamas uses rockets up to the 400-kilogram mark, which is very large, but those are more rare. The typical rocket that Hamas would be firing would be in the 5 to 25-kilogram mark, which is vastly less explosive than you would have seen even in that video, even at night with as much light as there was.
The Israeli government said it was an Islamic Jihad rocket, so I showed Dylan a video being circulated by pro-Israel groups on social media.
So yeah, these are R-23 rockets, and with all rockets, a lot of the sound that a rocket is going to produce is going to be at the time that it is launched. Rockets are not a thing that burn the whole way to their target, so there's not a lot of screaming and expenditure of fuel as a rocket comes in. So usually a rocket coming in, there might be the sound of some air moving, but there is not a large expenditure of fuel. You don't typically get what you would with like a guided bomb or something. It's usually a quieter process as a rocket comes in, maybe just a little bit of sound. Certainly not what you would see in the video that is being passed around as the impact on the hospital.
Claim 3. The Hamas rocket failed in the air, and that's why it landed on the hospital.
Usually when a rocket fails and falls to the ground, there's a bit of an extended explosion period, because the fuel will combust over a period of time, and the explosives that are in there will ignite in a fashion that was not as intended. So not warhead first necessarily. It's a bit more of an extended type of an explosion. So it definitely does not seem like it would be a failed Hamas rocket attack. It doesn't have any of those characteristics to me, but it certainly does look like a standard American munition, the likes of which we have sent at this point thousands to Israel to be used for explicitly this kind of purpose. I have it on my account somewhere in a video of those coming into Israel off of a C-71, something like 300 to 400 2,000-pound JDAMs going into Israel. And then shortly after that video, there is an increase in the number of videos that we had seen coming out from the Gaza Strip of large penetrating bombs. So something that is designed to take out large concrete structures.
Claim 4. Israel doesn't bomb hospitals. A claim that is very straightforward to refute, given Israel bombed the same hospital just 2 days before.
This was not something that had occurred just out of nowhere. The previous day, the people in that hospital had been warned by the IDF that the hospital was going to be struck. So it certainly was a plan, and it was an explicit plan. It does seem to me the IDF maybe had intended to strike this hospital, had hoped that people would have evacuated out of it before that had occurred, and when they did not, and they struck it anyway, immediately went into damage control mode. That's what it looks like to me.